The saloon's piano keys felt like ice beneath Margaret's fingers, though the room blazed with body heat and whiskey fumes. 5 winters she'd played here, in Redemption Creek, Wyoming territory, and 5 winters she'd perfected the art of keeping her eyes on the ivory keys, never meeting the gaze of any man who stood too close, breathed too loud, or suggested things that made her skin crawl. Her mother's wedding ring, the only thing she'd kept after the fire that took everything, hung on a chain beneath her high-collared dress, hidden like her heart. She played Lorena for the 3rd time that night, her fingers mechanical, her mind elsewhere, anywhere but here. Before we continue with Margaret's journey, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. Your support truly matters and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. Also, I'm curious, where are you listening to this story from? Please let me know in the comments. The December wind howled outside, rattling the saloon's windows. Margaret played through it, played through the card games and arguments, played through her own numbness. At 26, she felt ancient. The daughter of a preacher, she'd once believed in goodness, in protection, in answered prayers. Then her father died, her mother remarried, and her stepfather taught her that some men wore monsters' faces beneath their Sunday smiles. She'd run 3 years ago, taking only the clothes on her back and her mother's ring. Found work here because even rough frontier towns needed music, and a woman who kept her head down and her mouth shut could survive on piano wages and tips. Survive, not live, just survive. That's a mighty sorrowful tune for a Saturday night. The voice came from her left, deep, quiet, different from the usual drunken requests. Margaret's hands stuttered on the keys. She recovered quickly, starting the verse again, eyes fixed downward. I said, I heard you. Her voice came out sharper than intended. I play what I know. Boot heels clicked against the wooden floor as he moved closer. She could see his shadow now, tall and broad-shouldered, but she didn't look up, never look up. You know any waltzes? Her fingers stilled completely. Waltzes? Yes, ma'am. It's my sister's wedding next week, and I'm supposed to lead the first dance. Been 5 years since I waltzed with anyone, and I'm rusty as an old horseshoe. Thought maybe you'd play one, so I could remember the rhythm. Something in his tone, respectful, almost shy, made Margaret's chest tighten. She glanced up before she could stop herself. He stood about 6 feet tall, maybe 30 years old, with shoulders that strained his brown coat and hands that looked like they'd worked every day of his life. Dark hair curled slightly over his collar, and his eyes, gray as storm clouds, met hers with startling directness. Not leering, not demanding, just seeing her. Margaret looked down fast enough to make her neck ache. I don't play for private requests. I'll pay double your usual. No. Silence stretched between them. She expected him to walk away angry, like most men did when she refused. Instead, he shifted his weight, and when he spoke again, his voice carried something she hadn't heard in years: understanding. You play beautiful, ma'am, even when you're playing sad, but you look like you haven't seen anything but those keys in a long time. He paused. My name's Daniel Thornton. I own the Double T Ranch about 10 miles north, and I'm not asking you to look at me or talk to me or do anything that makes you uncomfortable. I'm just asking for a waltz. One song. Then I'll leave you be. The word waltz hung in the air like a promise. Margaret's mother had taught her waltzes when she was small, before everything went wrong. They danced in the kitchen while bread rose. her mother humming the melody, her father laughing from his study. Her hands found the keys before she gave conscious permission. The blue Danube flowed out, hesitant at first, then stronger. She heard Daniel step back, giving her space, and somehow that made it easier. Her fingers remembered the sweeping rhythm, the rise and fall of the waltz tempo. She played the entire piece without stopping, without looking up, pouring 5 years of silence into the music. When the final notes faded, the whole saloon had gone quiet. "Thank you," Daniel said softly. "That was thank you." He left money on the piano, far more than double, and walked toward the door. Margaret watched his back as he paused to speak with the barkeeper, watched him settle his hat on his head, watched him disappear into the December night. Her hands were shaking. For the next 3 nights, Daniel Thornton didn't return. Margaret told herself she wasn't disappointed, wasn't listening for his voice beneath the usual chaos. She played her sad songs and collected her tips and went home to her rented room above the general store, where she lay awake and wondered why one respectful conversation had cracked something in her chest. On the 4th night, the saloon door opened during a blizzard that had kept half the town indoors. Snow swirled in with the figure who stumbled through, a woman in a thin dress, barefoot, blood running from her nose. Margaret's fingers crashed discordant on the keys. The woman collapsed before anyone could reach her. "Dear God," the barkeeper breathed, rushing forward. "That's Sarah Brennan, Judge Brennan's daughter." Margaret was already off the piano bench, kneeling beside the girl, barely 20, trembling like an injured bird. "Get blankets and whiskey, the good kind, for shock, now." Training from her mother, who'd nursed the sick in their parish, took over. Margaret checked for broken bones, pressed cloth to the bleeding nose, wrapped the girl in her own shawl. Sarah's eyes were glazed, her breathing rapid. "He found out," Sarah whispered, "about the baby. He said he'd kill me before he let me shame the family. I ran." Margaret's blood went cold. She knew that voice, that particular terror. "You're safe now, I promise." "No place is safe." Sarah grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "He's the judge. He controls everything. He'll find me and drag me back and—" The door burst open again. Judge Brennan stood there, snow-covered and furious, flanked by 2 deputies. His eyes locked on his daughter with murderous rage. "There you are, you ungrateful little—" "She's hurt and needs medical attention," Margaret said, rising to her feet. Her voice didn't shake, though her legs did. "And she's staying here until the doctor arrives." The judge's face purpled. "You have no authority to—" "Actually, she does." Daniel Thornton stepped out from the crowd at the bar. Margaret hadn't even noticed him there. He moved forward with deliberate calm, positioning himself between the judge and the 2 women on the floor. "The lady said Miss Brennan needs a doctor," Daniel continued. "So that's what's happening. You can wait outside, Judge, or you can go home, but you're not touching that girl. This is my daughter. This is a human being who's bleeding and scared." Daniel's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. "And I see a woman worth protecting, not property to be dragged around." The judge's hand went to his pistol. 3 other men at the bar, clearly Daniel's ranch hands, stood up slowly, hands resting on their own weapons. The tension in the room pulled tight enough to snap. "You're interfering with family business, Thornton." "I'm preventing a crime, Your Honor." Daniel's emphasis on the title dripped with irony. "Now you've got 2 choices. Walk out that door and let cooler heads prevail, or try something stupid and find out exactly how many witnesses saw you threaten your injured daughter." For a moment, Margaret thought the judge would pull his gun. Then he looked around the saloon, saw every face turned against him, and backed toward the door. "This isn't over," he snarled. "That girl belongs to me." "Nobody belongs to anyone," Margaret said quietly. The judge's eyes cut to her, and she forced herself to meet them, despite the fear churning in her gut. Not anymore. When the door slammed behind the judge and his deputies, the saloon erupted in nervous conversation. Daniel turned to Margaret, and for the first time in 5 years, she didn't look away. "Thank you," she said. "You stood up first." He knelt beside Sarah, checking her pulse with surprisingly gentle hands. "We need to get her somewhere warm and safe. My sister Emma's a midwife. She can look after Miss Brennan until this blows over." "The judge won't let it blow over." "No," Daniel agreed. "He won't." He looked up at Margaret, and something passed between them. Understanding, recognition, but shared knowledge of what men like the judge were capable of. Which is why Miss Brennan needs to disappear for a while, and anyone helping her will need to disappear too. Margaret's heart hammered. "I can't just leave. My job, my room." "Your life," Daniel interrupted gently. "The judge knows you helped his daughter. You think he's going to forget that?" She hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't let herself. But now reality crashed down. She'd made herself a target. Again, just like before, when she'd told the sheriff about her stepfather, and no one believed her, and she'd had to run. "I can't run again," she whispered. "I'm so tired of running." Daniel stood, offered his hand. "Then don't run. Come north to my ranch. Bring Miss Brennan. My sister will care for her. And you," he paused, "you can play piano where nobody asks you to do anything but make music. No drunks, no demands, just peace." "You don't even know me." "I know you've been playing without meeting anyone's eyes for 5 winters," he said. "I know you stood up to a judge for a girl you'd never met. I know you play Lorena like your heart's breaking, and waltzes like you're remembering better days." His voice softened. "And I know what it looks like when someone's been hurt and learned to hide. Because I see that look in the mirror every morning." Margaret stared at his outstretched hand, rough with calluses, scarred across the knuckles, trembling slightly despite his calm expression. A hand that had worked and fought and built something. A hand that wasn't reaching to grab or take or hurt. She placed her hand in his. "Together?" she asked, the word barely audible. His fingers closed around hers carefully, like she was something precious and breakable. Together. The ride to the Double T Ranch took 3 hours through snow that had turned the world white and silent. Daniel drove the wagon, while Margaret sat in back with Sarah, keeping the girl warm with blankets Daniel had purchased from the general store, along with her few belongings. He'd paid her rent for 2 months, in case you change your mind, and left money with the barkeeper to ship her piano north when the weather cleared. "You're sending for my piano?" Margaret had asked, stunned. "You're a pianist," Daniel replied simply. "Like I'm a rancher. Man needs his tools." Now, as the wagon climbed into hills, silvered with moonlight, Margaret watched Daniel's broad back and wondered what kind of man saw a piano as a tool rather than a luxury. What kind of man stood up to a judge for strangers? What kind of man offered sanctuary without asking for anything in return? The Double T appeared as lights in the distance. A main house, barn, and several outbuildings forming a small compound. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys. As they drew closer, Margaret saw corrals and livestock shelters, everything neat and well-maintained despite the harsh winter. The front door opened before they reached it. A woman in her late 20s emerged, dark hair in a practical braid, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Danny? She saw Sarah bundled in the wagon bed. "Oh God, what happened?" "Emma, this is Miss Margaret." Daniel paused. "I'm sorry, I never got your last name." "Fletcher," Margaret said. "Margaret Fletcher. Margaret Fletcher and Miss Sarah Brennan. They need sanctuary, and Sarah needs your skills." Emma's face transformed from confusion to fierce protectiveness in an instant. "Bring her inside. I've got the guest room ready. I always keep it ready." She looked at Margaret. "You too, dear. You look half frozen." The house wrapped around Margaret like a warm blanket. Not fancy, but solid and clean, and filled with the smell of bread and wood smoke. Emma directed them to a bedroom on the ground floor, where she examined Sarah with efficient gentleness, while Daniel started a fire in the hearth. "Nose isn't broken, just bloodied," Emma announced. "Baby's heartbeat is strong. She's mostly suffering from exhaustion and cold." She looked at Sarah with compassion. "When did you last eat, sweetheart?" "Yesterday morning," Sarah whispered. "He locked me in the cellar after I told him. Said I needed to think about what I'd done." Emma's jaw tightened. She glanced at Daniel, and Margaret saw fury in both their faces, the same righteous anger she felt burning in her own chest. "You're safe here," Emma said firmly. "The double T doesn't belong to men like your father. It belongs to people who believe in decency. You understand me? You're safe." Sarah burst into tears. Emma held her while she sobbed, stroking her hair and murmuring comfort. Daniel backed toward the door, gesturing for Margaret to follow. In the hallway, he rubbed his face tiredly. "Emma will take good care of her. She's delivered half the babies in 3 counties and stood up to more than one bastard husband who thought he could control how his wife birthed. She sounds remarkable." "She is." Daniel smiled slightly. "Our ma died when Emma was 16. She raised me from 13 to manhood, ran this ranch when our father got too sick to work, and never let anyone tell her what women could or couldn't do." Margaret felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight bands that had held her heart captive for so long. "You've both been hurt," she said quietly. "You said you see it in the mirror every morning." Daniel's smile faded. He looked at her for a long moment, something raw and honest in his gray eyes. "Come on. I'll show you your room. Then, if you're not too tired, maybe you'll let me tell you about it over coffee." Her room was smaller than Emma's guest room, but comfortable, with a window overlooking snow-covered pastures and a stove already burning. Someone had laid out a clean nightgown and robe, along with a pitcher of water and washing basin. "Emma prepared this too?" Margaret asked. "She always keeps the house ready for anyone who might need shelter." Daniel lingered in the doorway. "There's a lock on the inside of the door. You're welcome to use it, and I'm in the room at the end of the hall if you need anything, or if you don't need anything, or if you just want to be left completely alone." He was giving her every possible reassurance, Margaret realized, making sure she knew she had control, had safety, had choice. "Coffee," she said. "You mentioned coffee." Daniel's whole face brightened. "I did. I'll put a pot on." The kitchen was the heart of the house, a huge room with a long table that could seat 12, a massive cook stove, and windows that would flood the space with light come morning. Daniel set about making coffee with practiced efficiency, while Margaret sat at the table, watching his movements. "My father was a good man," Daniel said as he measured grounds. "Taught me to work the land, to respect it, to build something that would last. But he was also proud." too proud to accept help when drought hit 5 years back. We lost most of the herd. He borrowed money from every source he could find, trying to recover. The coffee began to percolate, filling the kitchen with rich aroma. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed, looking at something far beyond the walls. There was a woman in town, Victoria Ashland, beautiful, educated, daughter of a banker. I was 25 and stupid, and flattered that someone like her would notice a struggling rancher. She said she loved me, said she'd help talk to her father about extending our loans. I believed her. Margaret's chest tightened. She knew this story's shape already. Turns out, Victoria was engaged to a railroad executive in Denver. She just wanted some frontier adventure before settling into her real life. When her fiancé came to collect her, she laughed about the rustic cowboy who'd actually thought she was serious. Did it right in front of half the town, including my father. Daniel, my father had a stroke that night. The shame, the stress, it was too much. He died 2 days later. Daniel's voice went hollow. I kept the ranch through sheer stubbornness and Emma's brilliance with money. Built it back up over 5 years. But I promised myself I'd never let anyone close enough to destroy me like that again. Never trust, never hope, just work and survive. He poured coffee into 2 mugs, brought them to the table, sat across from Margaret. His hands wrapped around his mug, like he needed its warmth. Then tonight, I saw you stand up to a judge for a girl you didn't know, even though it meant making yourself a target. Saw you refuse to run because you're tired of running. And I thought, he looked up, met her eyes directly. I thought maybe I've been surviving instead of living too. Margaret's hands shook as she lifted her own mug. The coffee burned her throat, but she welcomed the sensation, the proof she could still feel. My stepfather was a deacon, she said. The words came out before she could stop them, like Daniel's honesty had unlocked something in her. Everyone loved him. He gave such moving sermons, donated to every charity, volunteered at the orphanage. But at home, when no one could see, she paused, took another sip of coffee, forced herself to continue. He liked to hurt things. Started with animals when I was small, then moved to my mother, then to me. The particular kind of hurt that doesn't leave visible scars, but leaves you feeling like you're contaminated, ruined. Daniel's hands tightened on his mug, but he didn't interrupt. I told the sheriff when I was 23, showed him the bruises on my mother's arms, told him about the things my stepfather did in the dark. The sheriff told me I was a hysterical girl trying to destroy a good man's reputation. My stepfather called it lies and delusion. My mother, Margaret's voice cracked, my mother chose him. Said I was possessed by demons, that I'd always been a difficult child, that I needed to ask forgiveness for bearing false witness. Jesus, Daniel breathed. So I left, took my real father's wedding ring, the only thing my mother had kept from before, and I ran. Worked in saloons from Colorado to Wyoming, playing piano and keeping my head down, and swearing I'd never let anyone make me feel powerless again. She met Daniel's eyes, but I still feel powerless, every single day. Because I let fear turn me into a ghost. Daniel reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull back. When she didn't, he covered her hand with his. You're not a ghost, Margaret. Ghosts don't stand up to judges. Ghosts don't play waltzes that make hard men remember their mother's kitchens. Ghosts don't survive. His hand was so warm, so steady. Margaret stared at their joined hands and felt tears building behind her eyes. "I don't know how to be anything else," she whispered. "Then maybe we figure it out together," Daniel said. "You teach me to live instead of just survive. I teach you that not all men use strength to hurt. We both learn what it means to trust again." "That's a big ask." "It is," he agreed. "But I already know you're brave enough. You just don't know it yet." Margaret let the tears fall then, silent streams down her cheeks that Daniel didn't rush to wipe away or demand she stop. He just held her hand and waited, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. When she finally composed herself, he stood. "It's late. You should rest. But Margaret," he paused at the kitchen door, "tomorrow, if you want, I'll teach you to ride. My mare Clementine is gentle as a lamb and patient with beginners. Thought you might like to see the ranch from horseback." "I've never ridden a horse." "I know. That's why I'm offering to teach you." He smiled. "Go slow, take your time, and trust that I'll die before I let you get hurt." The echo of his earlier promise, "I'll die before I hurt you," hung in the air. Margaret nodded, not trusting her voice. In her room, she locked the door out of habit, then stood at the window looking out at the snow-covered ranch. Somewhere in the barn, horses shifted and stamped. In the guest room, Sarah slept under Emma's watchful care. In his room at the hall's end, Daniel probably lay awake, thinking about dead fathers and false-hearted women. And here she stood, 5 winters after she'd stopped meeting people's eyes, feeling something dangerous and terrifying bloom in her chest. Hope. Margaret woke to pale sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of bacon frying. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was back in her childhood home before everything went wrong. Then reality settled. She was at the Double T Ranch, miles from Redemption Creek, probably a target of Judge Brennan's rage. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt oddly calm. Emma was at the stove when Margaret entered the kitchen, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. "Morning, dear. Coffee's hot. Plates are on the table. Sarah's still sleeping. Best thing for her right now. Daniel's out feeding livestock, but he said to tell you he'll be ready to ride whenever you are." Margaret poured coffee, studying Emma's profile. The woman had Daniel's same steady strength, the same set to her jaw that spoke of someone who'd faced hard things and kept standing. "Thank you," Margaret said, "for taking us in without question." Emma flipped another pancake. "Danny told me your story, and Sarah's. I've seen enough women trapped by men who think they own them to know that sanctuary isn't charity, it's justice." She glanced at Margaret. "Besides, anyone who stood up to Judge Brennan is either very brave or very stupid, and Danny says you're the former." "I might be both." Emma laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Well, that makes 3 of us. Sit down and eat. You'll need your strength for riding lessons." The food was simple, but delicious. As Margaret ate, ranch hands began filtering through the kitchen. 3 men who nodded respectfully and took plates from Emma before heading back outside. They didn't leer or make crude jokes or even linger. They treated Margaret like she belonged there. It was such a small thing, such basic human decency, but it made her throat tight. Daniel appeared in the doorway, covered in snow, cheeks ruddy from cold. "Ready?" Margaret looked down at her saloon dress, impractical for riding. Emma followed her gaze and smiled. "I laid out some of my old clothes in your room. Riding skirt and boots. We're about the same size. Go change, then let my fool brother try to teach you what took me years to master." 20 minutes later, Margaret stood in the barn, wearing Emma's practical riding clothes. facing a dappled gray mare with liquid brown eyes. Clementine, Daniel had called her. The horse nickered softly, breath steaming in the cold air. "First rule," Daniel said, standing beside the mare. "Let her know you're here. Hold out your hand. Let her smell you. Show her you're not a threat." Margaret extended a trembling hand. Clementine's muzzle was velvet soft against her palm, warm breath tickling her skin. Something in Margaret's chest loosened further. "Good," Daniel murmured. "Now stroke her neck. Firm but gentle. Let her feel your confidence." "I'm not confident." "Then fake it until you are." He demonstrated, running his hand down Clementine's neck with assurance. Horses sense fear, but they also sense intent. If you're trying to connect with her, trying to understand her, she'll feel that too. Margaret copied his motion. The mare's coat was smooth under her fingers, muscles shifting beneath. She'd never touched anything so alive, so powerful. "She's beautiful," Margaret whispered. "She is, and she's yours to ride whenever you want." Daniel moved to Clementine's side. "Come around here. I'll show you how to mount." The lesson took 2 hours. Daniel taught her how to position her feet in the stirrups, how to hold the reins, how to signal the mare with subtle pressure. He kept one hand on the bridle, while Margaret made slow circles in the paddock, his voice steady and encouraging. "You're a natural," he said when she completed her 5th circuit without his guidance. "Most beginners tense up, try to control too much. You're listening to her." Margaret felt pride warm her chest, a sensation she'd almost forgotten. She's easy to listen to. Animals usually are. It's people who complicate things. They rode together that afternoon, Daniel on his bay gelding, Margaret on Clementine, moving slowly through snow-dusted pastures. He pointed out boundaries of his land, told her about his plans to expand the herd come spring, described the hard work of ranching with genuine love. "You never wanted anything else?" Margaret asked. "Never. Land doesn't lie to you, doesn't pretend to be something it's not. You work hard, treat it right, and it provides. Simple." "Nothing's simple." Daniel reined his horse closer, and for a moment their knees brushed. "No," he agreed, "but some things are worth the complexity." That evening, Sarah joined them for dinner, still pale but stronger. She sat between Emma and Margaret, picking at her food, looking like a frightened rabbit. "Judge Brennan sent a deputy to town today," one of Daniel's ranch hands reported over Stu, asking questions about where his daughter went. Sarah's fork clattered to her plate. "He's going to find me." "No," Daniel said flatly. "He's not. I sent word to the territorial marshal this morning, explained the situation. Judge Brennan has no jurisdiction on my land, and if he tries to take you by force, he'll be committing kidnapping. The marshal's not a fan of judges who abuse their authority. But he's powerful. He's a bully," Emma interrupted gently, "and bullies rely on people being too scared to fight back. We're not scared, Sarah, and you don't have to be either." Sarah looked around the table, at Emma's fierce loyalty, at Daniel's quiet strength, at Margaret's steady presence. Something in her face shifted. "I want to learn to shoot," she said suddenly. "If he comes, I want to be able to defend myself." Daniel smiled. "I'll teach you. After breakfast tomorrow, we'll start with targets." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Mornings, Daniel taught Margaret and Sarah to ride, improving their skills until they could canter across open ground. Afternoons, they learned to shoot, first pistols, then rifles, until Margaret could hit targets at 50 yards, and Sarah could load and fire without flinching. Emma taught them ranching skills, how to milk cows, churn butter, mend fences, tend chickens. Practical knowledge that made them less dependent, more capable. And every evening, after dinner, Margaret played the piano that had arrived by freight wagon. Daniel had set it up in the main room, and the first time she'd touched those keys in the ranch house, she'd played the Blue Danube, the waltz he'd requested what felt like a lifetime ago. This time, she'd looked at him while she played. One night in late January, a blizzard swept through with brutal force. The wind howled like a living thing, shaking the ranch house walls. Daniel and his men worked through the night, ensuring livestock had shelter and breaking ice on water troughs. Margaret couldn't sleep. She paced her room, listening to the storm's rage, feeling it echo something in her own chest. Finally, she gave up and went to the kitchen to make tea. Daniel was already there, stripped to his shirt sleeves despite the cold, washing cuts on his hands at the sink. He looked exhausted. "You're hurt," Margaret said. "Barbed wire caught me while fixing a fence. It's nothing. Let me see." He started to protest, then saw the determination in her face and held out his hands. The cuts weren't deep but ugly, crusted with dried blood. Margaret fetched Emma's medical supplies and set to work cleaning the wounds with carbolic solution. "This will sting," she warned. "I can handle." Daniel hissed as the antiseptic hit. "Holy hell, that burns." "Go slow," Margaret murmured, echoing his own words to her on her first riding lesson. "It hurts, I know, but we need to do this right." She worked carefully, cleaning each cut, applying salve, wrapping his hands in clean bandages. Daniel watched her face the entire time, his breathing shallow. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "My mother taught me, before." Margaret paused. "Before everything went wrong, she was the kindest woman I knew. She taught me to care for people." "She taught you well." Margaret tied off the final bandage and found she didn't want to let go of his hands. "Daniel, I need to tell you something." "Okay?" "I'm scared." The words rushed out. "I'm scared because I'm starting to feel safe here. And every time I felt safe before, it's been ripped away. I'm scared because I look forward to seeing you every morning, and I don't know if I can survive being disappointed again. I'm scared because..." Daniel pulled one hand free and touched her face, just the lightest brush of bandaged fingers against her cheek. "I'm scared too, Margaret, terrified, because I promised myself I wouldn't let anyone matter again, and you matter. You matter so damn much that it keeps me awake at night. What do we do?" "I don't know." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "But maybe being scared together is better than being safe and alone." They stayed like that for a long time, breathing the same air, connected by nothing more than proximity and possibility. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, something warm and fragile and desperately hopeful began to bloom. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm going to say something, and you can tell me if it's too much, too fast, too anything, but I need to say it. Okay. 5 winters you played piano without meeting anyone's eyes. And then I asked for the last waltz, and you looked up, and I saw you. Really saw you. And I've been falling in love with you every day since, even though we've only known each other a month, even though it's crazy and complicated and probably doomed." Margaret kissed him. Not gently, not tentatively, but with 5 years of loneliness and longing poured into one desperate connection. Daniel made a startled sound, then pulled her closer with his bandaged hands, kissing her back like she was air and he was drowning. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Margaret laughed, a sound she barely recognized from her own throat. Is that a yes? Daniel asked, lips curving into a smile. That's a, maybe we're both crazy, but let's be crazy together. I'll take it. They kissed again, softer this time, learning the shape of each other's mouths. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel kept his forehead pressed to hers. I need you to understand something, he said seriously. I know what happened to you. I know why you're scared of intimacy, of being vulnerable. And I swear to you, on my father's grave, on this ranch, on everything I am, I will never push you, never demand, never take what you're not ready to freely give. Whatever happens between us, it happens at your pace. You understand me? Margaret's eyes burned with tears. How are you real? I could ask you the same thing. He kissed her forehead. Now you should probably go back to bed before Emma finds us and teases me mercilessly. Margaret reluctantly pulled away, but at the kitchen door, she turned back. Daniel? Yeah. I'm falling in love with you too. His smile lit up the whole room. February brought a thaw, melting snow into mud and swelling creeks into torrents. It also brought Judge Brennan. He arrived with 4 armed men. Not deputies, Margaret noted, but hired guns. They rode onto Double T land like they owned it, ignoring posted boundaries, heading straight for the ranch house. Margaret was in the paddock with Clementine when Emma ran out, face pale. They're coming. Danny's in the north pasture. Someone needs to warn him. I'll go, Margaret said, already mounting. She'd learned enough in 2 months to gallop when necessary. She found Daniel repairing fence line with 2 ranch hands. Your father has company, she called, reining in Clementine. Judge Brennan and armed men. Daniel's face went hard. Get back to the house. Take Sarah to the root cellar. Emma knows where. Stay there no matter what you hear. I'm not hiding. Margaret. He rode close, gripped her hand. Please. I can't fight if I'm worried about you. Trust me. Please. She wanted to argue, but she saw the fear beneath his command, the desperate need to keep her safe. So she nodded and raced back. Sarah was already in the root cellar, a reinforced underground room stocked with supplies. Emma handed Margaret the loaded rifle, just in case. She said grimly, then descended to join Sarah. Margaret stayed at the house's upper window, rifle ready, watching as Daniel and his men rode in to meet the judge's party. They faced each other in the yard, Daniel calm and deadly, the judge arrogant and furious. Margaret couldn't hear the words, but she saw the judge point toward the house, saw Daniel shake his head, saw one of the hired guns reach for his weapon. Daniel was faster. His shot hit the ground inches from the man's boot. A warning, not a killing. Next one goes higher, Daniel's shout carried to the house. The standoff lasted forever and no time at all. Finally, a new rider appeared, wearing a marshal's badge. He positioned himself between the 2 groups, clearly taking Daniel's side. After heated discussion, the judge wheeled his horse around and rode off, his hired guns following. But his parting look toward the ranch house promised this wasn't over. That night, Daniel paced the kitchen like a caged animal. He'll come back. Maybe with more men. Maybe with legal papers. Forged, if necessary. I can't protect you forever. Then don't, Margaret said. Everyone turned to stare at her. I'm tired of being protected, she continued. I'm tired of hiding, of running, of waiting for men like him to dictate my life. We need to go on offense. What are you suggesting? Emma asked. Margaret took a deep breath. Sarah, you said your father locked you in the cellar. Did he hurt you in other ways? Ways that would be crimes even a judge couldn't explain away? Sarah nodded slowly. Since I was 14. He said it was his right as my father. Said if I ever told, he'd make sure everyone knew I was a liar and a whore. Rage burned in Margaret's chest, clean and righteous. Then we tell everyone. We find every woman he's hurt, every family he's threatened, every dirty secret he's buried. We build a case so damning that even his fellow judges will have to act. That's dangerous, Daniel said. Living is dangerous. Margaret met his eyes. But I'm done surviving. I want to live. And I want Sarah to live too, not spend her whole life looking over her shoulder. Emma smiled slowly. I know a few women who've had dealings with the judge. Women who might talk if they knew they weren't alone. The territorial marshal seems sympathetic, one of the ranch hands added. He might provide protection while we gather testimony. Daniel looked at Margaret for a long moment. You're sure about this? I'm sure I'd rather fight and lose than hide and survive. Okay then. He held out his hand. Together? Margaret took it without hesitation. Together. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind. Emma contacted women throughout 3 territories, daughters, wives, servants who'd suffered under Judge Brennan's authority. The marshal provided safe passage for those willing to testify. Sarah proved remarkably brave, recording her story in detail despite the trauma. Margaret played piano every evening, working through her fear and fury on the keys. And every night, Daniel sat beside her on the bench, not touching, but present, solid, real. One evening, she played a waltz she'd learned as a child, the anniversary song. When she finished, Daniel cleared his throat. Margaret Fletcher, I have a question to ask you. She turned to face him, heart suddenly hammering. We've known each other less than 3 months, Daniel said, which is crazy. And we're in the middle of a legal battle that could get us all killed, which is crazier. And I'm about to do the craziest thing of all. He slid off the piano bench and knelt on one knee. From his pocket, he pulled a simple gold band, his mother's ring, Margaret realized. The one Emma wore in the family photograph above the mantel. I love you, Daniel said simply. I love your courage and your music and the way you look at the world like you're seeing it fresh every day. I love that you stood up to a judge for a stranger and that you refused to be defeated. I love you scared and brave and everything in between. And I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. But I also know that life is short and uncertain. And I don't want to waste another day not being yours. He took a shaky breath. So will you marry me? Will you be my wife? Not because you need protection or because I'm offering shelter, but because we choose each other. Because we'd rather face the world together than survive it alone. Margaret looked at him. This man who'd seen her at her lowest and offered respect instead of pity, who'd taught her to ride and shoot and hope again, who made her laugh and made her brave and made her feel like herself for the first time in 5 years. Yes, she said. Yes, absolutely yes. Daniel stood and kissed her, and Emma burst into the room with Sarah behind her, both women already crying happy tears. About damn time, Emma shouted, pulling them both into a fierce hug. They married on the first day of spring, in the ranch house with Emma officiating. She'd gotten ordained by mail because Emma could do anything. Sarah stood as Margaret's attendant, radiant despite her growing belly. The ranch hands served as witnesses, along with the territorial marshal and 3 other women who'd come to testify against Judge Brennan. Margaret wore a simple dress Emma had altered from her own wedding gown. Daniel wore his best suit, hands still slightly scarred from winter fence work. When Emma asked if anyone objected, Margaret held her breath. No one did. Then, by the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, and by the power of 2 stubborn people who deserve happiness, I pronounce you husband and wife. Danny, kiss your bride before I cry on her dress. Daniel kissed Margaret softly, reverently, like she was something precious beyond words. When they pulled apart, everyone cheered. That night, in the room that was now theirs, Daniel stood at the window, looking out at moonlit pastures. Margaret came up behind him, racked her arms around his waist. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For asking for that waltz. For seeing me when I'd forgotten how to be seen. For being patient and kind and everything I'd stopped believing men could be." Daniel turned in her arms, cupped her face in his hands. "Thank you for looking up from the piano, for being brave enough to try again, for letting me love you." "Go slow?" she asked, echoing their first real conversation. "As slow as you need," he promised. "We have all the time in the world." They did go slow, learning each other's bodies with the same patience Daniel had shown teaching her to ride. Margaret cried halfway through, overwhelmed by gentleness, by pleasure without pain, by being wanted without being taken. "We can stop," Daniel murmured, brushing away her tears. "No," she said fiercely. "These are good tears. Keep going. Please keep going." He did, and it was healing and terrifying and absolutely perfect. Judge Brennan's trial began in May. The prosecution had gathered testimony from 17 women, documented evidence of abuse spanning 2 decades, and testimony from the territorial marshal about the judge's attempt to reclaim Sarah by force. Margaret testified on the 2nd day, telling the courtroom about the night Sarah had stumbled into the saloon, bleeding and barefoot. She met the judge's hate-filled gaze and didn't look away. Sarah testified on the 4th day. She was 6 months pregnant by then, glowing despite the trauma of reliving her childhood. She spoke clearly, calmly, detailing years of abuse. When the defense attorney tried to discredit her, calling her an ungrateful daughter spreading lies, Sarah simply said, "You're not my father. You don't know what happens behind closed doors." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, the courtroom erupted in cheers and sobs. Judge Brennan was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. Not enough, Margaret thought, but something. A beginning. Outside the courthouse, Sarah collapsed into Margaret's arms, shaking with relief. "It's over. It's really over." "It is," Margaret said, holding her tight. "You're free." 2 months later, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl in the Double T Ranch house. Emma delivered the baby while Daniel and Margaret waited anxiously in the kitchen. When Emma finally emerged, holding the tiny bundle, everyone cried. "She wants to name her Hope," Emma said, placing the baby in Margaret's arms, "because you gave her hope when she had none left." Margaret looked down at baby Hope's perfect face and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known possible. This child, born from trauma, but welcomed into love. This family, cobbled together from broken pieces, but stronger than any biological bond. "She's perfect," Margaret whispered. That evening, after Sarah and Hope were settled, Margaret and Daniel sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Margaret leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in a way she'd never imagined possible. 5 winters I played piano without meeting anyone's eyes, she said softly. And then you asked for the last waltz. And you looked up, Daniel finished. Changed both our lives in one glance. Do you regret it? The complications, the danger, all of it? Daniel pulled her closer, kissed the top of her head. Not for a single second. You and Emma and Sarah and Hope, you're my family now. The family I choose, not the one I was born to. And that makes all the difference. Together, Margaret said. Together, Daniel agreed. Always together. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Margaret played piano in the ranch house, but not alone. Daniel sat beside her on the bench, learning the basics while she laughed at his fumbling fingers. Sarah sang while nursing baby Hope. Emma called cooking instructions from the kitchen. 3 more women had joined their household over the summer. Refugees from violent homes, working on the ranch in exchange for shelter and safety. The Double T had become a sanctuary in truth, a place where broken people came to heal and learned that they were worth more than their trauma. Margaret played a waltz, the Blue Danube, of course. Daniel managed to pick out the melody with one hand while she filled in the harmony. It was clumsy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. When the song ended, Margaret looked at her husband, this good, patient, strong man who'd seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway, who'd taught her that she could be both vulnerable and powerful, who'd shown her that love didn't mean losing yourself, but finding yourself reflected in someone else's eyes. Happy? He asked. Ridiculously, she answered. Outside, autumn winds sang through the valley, carrying the promise of winter to come. But inside the Double T ranch house, there was warmth and music and laughter. There was family. There was home. There was love worth every risk they'd taken to find it. And when Margaret played piano now, she didn't just keep her eyes on the keys. She looked at the people around her, really looked, and let herself be seen in return. Because she'd learned that being visible wasn't weakness. It was the bravest thing she'd ever done. The first snow of their second winter together came early, blanketing the Double T in white silence by mid-November. Margaret stood at the kitchen window, watching Daniel and his men drive the cattle to lower pastures, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. 4 months along, and still the reality of it seemed impossible. That her body, which had known only violation and fear, could create life from love. You're thinking too hard again, Emma said, kneading bread dough at the table. Baby Hope crawled at her feet, now 10 months old, and into everything. I can see it in your shoulders. Margaret turned from the window. I'm scared. Of childbirth? That's normal. Of being a mother. The words came out in a rush. My mother chose my stepfather over me. Let him hurt me because it was easier than believing her daughter. What if I'm like her? What if I fail this baby the same way? Emma set down her dough, wiped her hands on her apron, and crossed to Margaret. She took both of Margaret's hands in her flour-dusted ones. Listen to me. You are nothing like the woman who abandoned you. Nothing. You stood up to a judge for a stranger's child. You've built a sanctuary for broken women. You loved Daniel with your whole heart and let yourself be loved in return. That takes strength your mother never had. But what if it's not enough? It will be. Emma squeezed her hands. Because you'll have Daniel, and me, and Sarah, and all the women here. You're not doing this alone, Margaret. None of us are alone anymore. Margaret pulled Emma into a fierce hug, feeling tears burn her eyes. Thank you for everything, for raising the man I love, for accepting me into your family, for... The kitchen door burst open. One of the ranch hands, young Tommy Brennan, who'd taken his mother's maiden name after his father's conviction, stumbled in, covered in snow and blood. Bandits, he gasped. 5 of them. They're driving off the cattle from the north pasture. Mr. Thornton and the others are trying to stop them, but they're outnumbered. They need... Margaret was already moving, grabbing the rifle from above the door. Emma, lock the house. Keep Sarah and Hope in the cellar. Tommy, can you ride? I can barely stand. Then I'm going. Margaret checked the rifle's load with practiced efficiency, stuffed extra ammunition in her pockets. She'd become a good shot over the past months, good enough that Daniel trusted her to hunt alone. Margaret, you're pregnant, Emma started. And my husband is outnumbered by bandits. Margaret met Emma's eyes. I'm not losing him. Not to thieves, not to anything. Lock the doors. I'll be back. She was out the door before Emma could protest further, running through snow toward the barn. Clementine nickered nervously as Margaret saddled her with shaking hands. Every moment counted. Every second Daniel was out there facing armed men alone. You're not as alone as you think, a voice said from the barn doorway. Margaret spun to find 3 women standing there. Ruth, Maria, and Catherine, all residents of the sanctuary who'd learned to shoot over the summer. They were armed and determined. This is our home too, Ruth said firmly, and we don't let our family fight alone. Margaret felt gratitude surge through her chest. Can you all ride hard? We can try, Maria answered. Let's go. The 4 women rode north through driving snow, following the sound of gunfire. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady on the reins. She'd spent 5 years hiding from danger. No more. They crested a ridge and saw the chaos below. Daniel and 3 ranch hands, pinned behind overturned wagons. 5 bandits firing from positions near the cattle herd. The stolen animals milled in confusion, their lowing barely audible over gunshots. Margaret assessed the situation with the clarity Daniel had taught her. Ruth, Maria, circle left and come up behind those rocks. Catherine, you're with me. We'll take the right flank. Don't shoot unless you have a clear target and they shoot first. Our goal is to make them think they're surrounded, make them run. Understood? The women nodded and split up. Margaret and Catherine moved through the snow, using terrain for cover, approaching the bandits' right side. She could see Daniel now, blood on his shoulder, face grim with determination. Her stomach clenched, but she forced herself to focus. When they were in position, Margaret fired a shot into the snow near the nearest bandit's feet. "Drop your weapons," she shouted. "You're surrounded." Ruth fired from the left. The bandits spun, suddenly realizing they were caught in a crossfire. One of them, a scarred man with cruel eyes, aimed toward Margaret's position. Daniel's shot took him in the leg before he could fire. "Touch my wife and I'll put the next one through your skull," he roared. The authority in his voice, the precision of his shot, broke the bandits' nerve. They scrambled for their horses, leaving their wounded companion behind, disappearing into the snow-covered hills. Margaret ran down the slope, rifle still ready, reaching Daniel's position. He was on his feet, favoring his left side, blood soaking through his coat. "You're hurt," she said, hands already reaching for him. "You're pregnant and you rode into a gunfight," he countered. But his voice, held more awe than anger. "Margaret, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking I'd rather fight beside you than wait at home wondering if you'd come back." She touched his face, needing to feel him solid and real beneath her fingers. "Are you badly hurt?" "Bullet grazed my shoulder. I'll live." He pulled her close with his good arm, buried his face in her hair. "God, when I saw you on that ridge, I thought my heart would stop. But you were magnificent. You and the others. You saved us." "We saved each other," Margaret corrected. "That's what family does." The wounded bandit turned out to be one of Judge Brennan's former hired guns, the same man whose boot Daniel had shot near during their first confrontation. Under questioning from the territorial marshal, he revealed that Brennan's associates had orchestrated the raid as revenge, hoping to destroy Daniel's ranch and everyone who'd testified against the judge. "There will be more," the marshal warned. Brennan had powerful friends, men who don't appreciate losing one of their own. That night, Daniel called a meeting of everyone at the ranch, his hands, the women residents, Emma, Sarah. They gathered in the main house, faces grim. "I won't lie to you," Daniel said. "Things are about to get more dangerous. These men will come after us again, maybe harder next time. Anyone who wants to leave, I'll pay your wages and help you relocate. No judgment. Your safety matters more than—" "We're staying," Ruth interrupted. Heads nodded around the room. "This is the first place I've felt safe in 10 years, Maria added. "I'm not running from men like that anymore." Catherine stood. "You taught us to fight, Mr. Thornton. Mrs. Thornton taught us we're worth fighting for. We're not leaving." Margaret felt tears sting her eyes. This family they built, not from blood, but from choice and courage, was stronger than any threat. "Then we prepare," Daniel said. "We fortify the ranch, set up watch rotations, train everyone who can hold a gun. And we stick together. Whatever comes, we face it as a family." "Together," Margaret said softly. "Together," everyone echoed. Winter deepened, and with it came both preparation and peace. Daniel reinforced the ranch buildings, installed better locks, positioned lookout posts at strategic points. Everyone trained daily with weapons, but they also continued their normal lives, caring for livestock, teaching children, playing music in the evenings. Margaret's pregnancy progressed smoothly despite the stress. Dr. Hastings rode out monthly to check on her, always remarking on her healthy color and strong constitution. Emma hovered like a protective hen, insisting Margaret rest more than she wanted. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Margaret protested one afternoon when Emma tried to take over her piano teaching duties. "You're carrying my niece or nephew, and I'll wrap you in cotton wool if I think it necessary," Emma retorted. "Now sit down and let Sarah handle the lesson." Sarah had become an excellent pianist under Margaret's tutelage, and little Hope loved nothing more than sitting on her mother's lap during practice, banging tiny hands on the low keys. Watching them together made Margaret's heart ache with hope and fear in equal measure. "You'll be a wonderful mother," Sarah said later, as if reading her thoughts. They sat together on the porch, bundled in blankets, watching the sunset. "You already are, in a way, to all of us." "That's different. You're all grown women who needed a mother figure anyway." Sarah shifted Hope on her lap. "You know what I remember most about that night I ran from my father? When you wrapped me in your shawl. Such a small gesture, but it was the first time in years anyone had shown me tenderness. You didn't even know me, but you protected me like I mattered. You did matter. You do matter." "Exactly," Sarah smiled. "That's what makes you a good mother already. You see people's worth, their humanity, even when they can't see it themselves." Your baby will grow up knowing they're valued, knowing love isn't conditional or violent. That's everything. Margaret placed her hand on her belly, feeling the flutter of movement within. I hope you're right. I am. Sarah's voice held absolute certainty. And when you doubt yourself, which you will, because that's what good mothers do, Daniel and Emma and I will be there to remind you. That night, Margaret woke to find Daniel's side of the bed empty. She found him in the nursery they'd been preparing, a small room off their bedroom that had once been storage. He sat in the rocking chair they'd ordered from Denver, holding a tiny knitted blanket Emma had made. Can't sleep? Margaret asked softly from the doorway. Daniel looked up, and in the lamplight, she saw vulnerability written across his face. I keep thinking about my father, how much I loved him, how much I wanted to make him proud, and how his death nearly broke me. Margaret crossed the room, settled herself on his lap, despite her growing belly. You're afraid, terrified. He wrapped his arms around her, one hand splaying protectively over where their child grew. What if I'm not a good father? What if I fail them the way my father failed me at the end, letting shame and pride matter more than— Stop. Margaret cupped his face, made him look at her. Your father was a good man who made one mistake, and you learned from it. You've spent 5 years rebuilding what that mistake destroyed, creating a legacy of strength and compassion. You've taken in broken people and made them whole. You love with your entire heart, even when it scares you. She kissed him softly. That's the father our child will know. Not a perfect man, but a good one, the best one. Daniel's eyes shone with unshed tears. How did I get so lucky? Finding you when I'd given up on finding anything. We found each other, Margaret corrected, when we both needed finding most. They sat together in the nursery, holding each other, feeling their baby move between them. Outside, winter wind howled around the ranch house, but inside was warmth and light and love enough to fight any darkness. Do you think about names? Daniel asked eventually. I do, Margaret smiled. If it's a girl, I'd like to call her Grace, because that's what you gave me. Grace when I deserved judgment. Grace when I was broken. Grace to become whole again. Grace Thornton. Daniel tested the name. I love it. And if it's a boy? What was your father's name? Samuel. Sam. Daniel's voice caught. You'd really? He gave me the greatest gift of my life by raising you to be the man you are. I'd be honored to name our son after him. Daniel kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, pouring gratitude and love into the connection. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Grace or Samuel Thornton, he murmured. Either way, they'll be born into more love than they'll know what to do with. Good, Margaret said. Every child deserves that. They returned to bed and made love slowly, carefully, celebrating the life they'd created and the future they were building. And when Margaret finally slept, she dreamed of children laughing in sunlit pastures, of a family that chose each other every day, of love that was stronger than fear. The attack came on the coldest night of February, when temperature dropped so low that breath froze in the air and ice coated every surface. Margaret woke to shouts and the smell of smoke. Daniel was already out of bed, pulling on pants and boots, grabbing his rifle. Stay here, he ordered. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Emma. Daniel! Please, Margaret. He cupped her face, kissed her hard. I need to know you're safe. Both of you. Then he was gone, running toward the source of smoke. Margaret watched from the window as flames engulfed the barn, bright orange against black night, terrifyingly beautiful and destructive. She saw Daniel organizing bucket brigades, saw his men fighting to control the blaze, saw dark figures on horseback circling the property. Not an accident, but an attack. Her hands moved to her belly, now 7 months swollen with pregnancy. She should stay hidden, should protect their baby. That's what Daniel wanted, what any reasonable person would do. But through the window, she saw one of the riders aim a rifle toward where Daniel stood, directing the firefighting efforts. Saw the glint of metal in firelight. Margaret moved without thinking. She grabbed Daniel's spare rifle from the closet, checked the load, threw a coat over her nightgown, and ran. The cold hit like a physical blow, but she barely felt it. She positioned herself at the corner of the house, steadied the rifle against her shoulder the way Daniel had taught her, and aimed at the rider. Not to kill, she couldn't, wouldn't, but to warn. She fired into the air above the horseman's head. The sharp crack of the rifle cut through chaos. The rider's horse spooked, rearing, and in that moment of distraction, one of Daniel's ranch hands tackled the man from his saddle. 2 more riders charged toward the main house. Margaret fired again, this time at the ground in front of them, creating a barrier. "Turn back," she shouted. "Turn back now!" But they kept coming. She fired twice more, each shot deliberate, controlled, forcing them to veer off course. Her hands were steady despite the cold, despite her fear, despite everything. Then Daniel was beside her, pulling her behind cover as return fire peppered the house's wall. "What the hell are you doing out here?" he demanded. "Saving your life," Margaret shot back. "That first rider was aiming at you. So you put yourself and our baby in danger? I put us together." She met his eyes fiercely. "I'm not waiting inside while you risk everything. We're a team, Daniel. For better or worse, in safety or danger. Together, remember?" For a moment, Daniel looked like he wanted to argue. Then he laughed, short and sharp and slightly unhinged. "God, I love you. Even when you're completely insane. Love you too. Now, can we focus on not dying?" They fought side by side as the ranch hands subdued the attackers and extinguished the barn fire. 3 men were captured. 2 escaped into the night. By the time the territorial marshal arrived at dawn, the immediate danger had passed. The barn was a total loss, but the horses and cattle had been saved. 2 ranch hands suffered minor burns. Daniel had a gash across his ribs from where debris had struck him. And Margaret, "Your wife is in early labor," Dr. Hastings announced after examining her. "The stress and cold triggered contractions. We need to get her inside immediately." Margaret's legs nearly gave out. "It's too early. I'm only 7 months." "Some babies come early and do just fine," the doctor said firmly. "But we need to keep you warm and calm. Emma, get hot water and clean linens. Daniel, your job is to breathe and stay out of the way." The next 18 hours were a blur of pain and fear and Emma's steady voice guiding her through. Daniel held her hand, despite his own injury, refusing to leave even when Emma suggested he rest. "Together," he kept saying. "We do this together." Margaret screamed his name during the worst contractions, squeezed his hand hard enough to bruise. The pain was beyond anything she'd imagined, eclipsing every hurt her stepfather had ever inflicted, because this pain had purpose, had meaning, was bringing life instead of death. "I can't," she sobbed at one point. "It's too much. I can't." "You can," Daniel said fiercely. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived things that would break most people. You rode into a gunfight while pregnant. You stood up to judges and bandits and your own fear. You can do this, Margaret. I know you can." "One more push," Emma encouraged. "Come on, dear. Your baby wants to meet you. One more." Margaret pushed with everything she had, felt something tear and shift, heard her own voice rise in a primal cry. Then, a baby's wail, thin and reedy, but undeniably alive. "It's a girl," Emma announced, tears streaming down her face. "A beautiful, perfect girl." Dr. Hastings worked quickly, checking the tiny infant. "She's small, but healthy. Strong lungs, good color. I'd say she was exactly ready to be born, regardless of timing." Emma cleaned the baby and wrapped her in soft blankets, then placed her in Margaret's arms. The world narrowed to the small, wrinkled face, the dark eyes that somehow seemed to see everything, the miniature fingers that gripped Margaret's thumb with surprising strength. "Grace," Margaret whispered. "Grace Thornton, you gave us quite a scare." "She's perfect," Daniel breathed, touching his daughter's tiny hand with wonder. "She's absolutely perfect, like her mother." Grace chose that moment to let out another wail, demanding and fierce. Margaret laughed through tears. "She's got her father's stubbornness and her mother's courage," Daniel added. He kissed Margaret's forehead, then his daughter's. "Thank you, for her, for everything, for being brave enough to fight beside me even when you shouldn't have. For Daniel." Margaret looked up at him, saw tears tracking through the soot on his face. "We did this together, all of it. That's what being a family means." Sarah appeared in the doorway with Hope, both of them eager to meet the new arrival. Ruth, Maria, and Catherine crowded behind them. Soon the room filled with women who'd become sisters, celebrating over baby Grace, all celebrating the newest member of their chosen family. Emma shooed them out after a few minutes, insisting Margaret needed rest. As the room emptied and quiet returned, Daniel settled carefully on the bed beside his wife and daughter. "The marshal arrested the men who attacked us," he said quietly. "They confessed to being hired by Judge Brennan's brother-in-law. Said they were supposed to destroy everything, drive us out. The marshal says there will be trials, probably more attempts at revenge." "Let them try," Margaret said, looking down at Grace's sleeping face. "We'll be ready. We'll always be ready, because we have something worth protecting now. Not just land or livelihood, but this, family, love, the future we're building. They can't destroy that." "No," Daniel agreed, wrapping his arms around them both. "They can't." Grace made a small sound in her sleep, and both parents froze, watching with wonder as their daughter's face scrunched up, then relaxed again. So small, so vulnerable, so absolutely perfect. "Do you remember what I said that first night?" Daniel asked. "When you stood up to Judge Brennan, you said you saw a woman worth protecting. I was wrong." He kissed Margaret's temple. "You're not worth protecting. You're worth standing beside, worth fighting with, not for, worth everything." Margaret leaned into him, exhausted and elated, and more complete than she'd ever imagined possible. "5 winters I played piano without meeting anyone's eyes, and then you asked for the last waltz, and took you as my wife," Daniel finished softly. "Best decision I ever made." Outside, dawn broke over the Double T Ranch, pink and gold lights spilling across snow-covered pastures, touching burned timber and new beginnings alike. Inside, a family rested, a baby slept, and love proved once again that it was stronger than any force that tried to destroy it. Grace Thornton turned 1 year old on a brilliant spring day, surrounded by more family than anyone could have imagined when she'd entered the world during that violent February night. The Double T Ranch had grown in the years since her birth. More buildings, more livestock, more women seeking sanctuary, more children born into safety. Margaret stood on the porch, watching Daniel teach Grace to stand on her wobbling legs, his big hands supporting her tiny ones, his laugh booming every time she bounced excitedly. Their daughter had his gray eyes and her dark curls, and a stubborn determination that came from both parents. "She'll be walking by summer," Emma predicted, joining Margaret on the porch with glasses of lemonade. "And then you'll never have a moment's peace." "I don't want peace," Margaret said honestly. "I want this, noise and chaos and life, so much life." Emma smiled, understanding in her expression. "You've come a long way from the woman who played piano without looking up. We all have." Margaret gestured to the yard, where Sarah supervised Hope and 3 other children playing under trees, where Ruth worked in the expanding vegetable garden, where Maria and Catherine hung laundry while gossiping and laughing. "Look what we've built." "What you and Daniel started," Emma corrected. "You took in one pregnant girl and created a movement. There are 6 ranches now, across 3 territories, all operating on the Double T model. Sanctuary for women, work for their hands, safety for their hearts. The territorial governor himself sent a commendation letter." Margaret shook her head. "It's not about commendations. It's about making sure no woman has to spend 5 winters playing piano without meeting anyone's eyes. Making sure every Sarah finds her hope. Every broken person finds their home." "And you found yours," Emma said softly. "With my brother." "I did." Margaret watched Daniel lift Grace onto his shoulders, watched her squeal with delight. "I found everything I'd stopped believing existed. Love, family, purpose. And it scared me to death at first, letting myself want it." "Still scared?" Margaret considered. "Sometimes. When I wake up at 3 in the morning and Grace is crying, and I remember my mother chose her husband over me. When bandits still target us occasionally, and I wonder if we're putting everyone in danger. When I think about how close I came to never walking into that saloon, never playing that waltz, never looking up." She paused, sipped her lemonade, watched her husband and daughter in the spring sunshine. "But then I remember what Daniel said. Being scared together is better than being safe and alone. And I look at what we've built here, this family that chose each other, and I think fear is just part of loving things that matter. So I choose to be scared and keep loving anyway." Emma clinked her glass against Margaret's. "To being scared and loving anyway." "To family," Margaret added. "To home," Emma finished. They drank to all of it, to the past they'd survived and the future they were building, to the women who'd found sanctuary and the children growing up knowing they were valued, to the men who'd learned that strength meant protecting, not controlling, to the family bound not by blood but by choice and courage. Daniel carried Grace over to the porch, the toddler giggling and pulling his hair. "Someone wants her mama," he announced, transferring their daughter into Margaret's arms. Grace immediately grabbed her mother's face with sticky hands, babbling in the language only she understood. Margaret kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of sunshine and innocence, then looked up at Daniel. "Play piano?" Grace demanded, one of the few clear phrases she'd mastered. "Mama play?" "Yes, baby girl. Mama will play." Inside, Margaret settled at her piano with Grace on her lap, tiny hands eager to bang on keys. Daniel sat beside them. Emma stood nearby. Through the window, they could see the rest of their extended family going about their day, working, laughing, living. Margaret played the Blue Danube, the waltz that had started everything. Grace contributed her own chaotic melody, but somehow it fit, messy and imperfect, and absolutely perfect. When the song ended, Grace clapped her hands and demanded, "More, more." "Again?" Margaret asked Daniel. "Always," he answered, his hand finding hers on the keys. "Everything good in my life happened because I asked for one more waltz." So Margaret played again, and kept playing as the afternoon stretched long and golden. Played as their family gathered around, as voices rose in song, as children danced and adults swayed. Played as the sun set over the Double T Ranch, painting the sky in shades of promise. 5 winters, she'd played piano without meeting anyone's eyes. And then a cowboy asked for the last waltz and took her as his wife, and everything changed. Not immediately, not easily, but completely. And when Margaret played now, she didn't just see the keys or the notes or the mechanics of music. She saw her husband beside her daughter on her lap, her sister-in-law nearby, her extended family surrounding her. She saw safety and belonging and love earned through courage. She saw home. And she met every eye in the room, letting them see her in return, because being visible wasn't weakness anymore. It was joy. It was connection. It was choosing every single day to be part of something bigger than her own fear. It was the bravest, most beautiful thing she'd ever done. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Margaret and Daniel's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.